Okay, let's take a look at some helicopter-based triggers. We'll start off by placing a Huey over here. We'll call it Huey, Huey 1. Make it playable. Make it a Huey. We'll have it start from the runway. And then over here, not too far away, we're going to have a FARP. There we go, we call that FARP 1. And over the FARP we're going to put a gazone. There we go. We will call this FARP 1 trigger. And we'll make it a little bit smaller. About 2/3 of a nautical mile. Covering most of the field there. Now what we want to do is simulate us taking troops from Krasnodar and dropping them off at this FARP. Now there are more complete ways of doing this with CTLD, but that's quite complicated, and this will work just as well, especially for single player missions. So what I'm now putting in are the infantry. We want them to have late activation, so there we've got a group of 7, and let's have them actually on the FARP, as close as we can get to the FARP. So they are now set up for late activation. We need a trigger. So we want to simulate us dropping these troops off. If we go into triggers now, and we have troops deployed. There we go, we'll call it that. We want part of group in zone, so we will want the Huey to be in the FARP trigger, and we want that to activate the infantry. But what this will do is, as soon as the Huey enters the trigger, those troops are going to just instantly spawn there. That's not very realistic. So we want to put in another condition for this Huey to make it a little bit more realistic. So we'll put in a new one here, and we will have, if we go right down, we will have units speed lower than. So there's Pilot 1. Pilot 1 will be the Huey. It's possible for you to rename these individually. So instead of calling it Pilot 1, let's call it Tilly B. And we'll now just double check that we got the right unit. There we go. Yeah, Tilly B. If Tilly B's speed is less than 1 knot and is in the trigger zone there, then the infantry will activate. So that will simulate us coming to a hover stop, or actually landing, to drop those troops off. You could also put in units height lower than, but you would have to make a note of the altitude. If you look at the bottom of the screen now, you'll see that the altitude is actually 66 feet. So you have to take that into consideration. Speed is a better one to use, especially in mountainous areas. Now we also want another indication that we have dropped these troops off, so let's put a message to group, message to Huey, and we'll say troops deployed. So now when we've done this, we will know that the troops have indeed been deployed. Now let's say that this FARP was in a difficult to spot location, and we want a flare to come up when we're quite close. So I'm just going to call this one flare trigger, and we'll actually make this one quite large. About that'll do. And since we know that the Huey is going to be coming in from roughly this direction, we'll put it over here. Now we'll make a new trigger. This one is actually a switched condition trigger. We've not used one of these ones before. Switched condition means that every time the conditions have been remet, the trigger will happen again. These can be quite useful for doing messages, which I will demonstrate here. So we'll call this one flare trigger, and the condition is part of group in zone, and that'll be the Huey within the flare trigger. And what we want it to do is fire a flare, signal flare. We want it to be on the FARP trigger, because that's where the actual drop zone is, and let's have it as a green one, and on a bearing of, it's going to be roughly 120, I would imagine. Down that way, yeah, 120. So it's going to fire a flare out this way, and it would do that every time we enter this trigger, leave it and come back. It's going to do that. To illustrate this, just for testing purposes, let's put in a message to the Huey group saying entering flare trigger. So not only will we get the visual there of the flare, but we'll also get this. To show you the difference between a switched condition and a continuous action, let's make another slightly different flare based on a continuous action. So let's have part of group in zone Huey within the FARP trigger and have the similar signal flare, but we'll make this a different colour. Let's make this one red, and we'll have it go off to the to a different direction as well. So what will happen is, as soon as the Huey enters the FARP trigger here, it will continuously fire red flares off this direction until we leave the trigger. Now, it's up to you which one of these you use, the switched condition or the continuous action. They both have their merits, but it's just useful for helping you show where one of these landing zones might be. The main thing that I'm trying to get across here is the troop transport idea. So let's load up this mission and see how this one goes. There we go, entering flare trigger, and you may be able to see off to our 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock there, a single white flare was released. Now if we exit this trigger and then re-enter it, we should get that same signal flare and the message entering flare trigger come up again. So I'll just reverse our direction, leave this field, and then in a few seconds I'll turn them back in and see if we can get that trigger to activate again. This is the switched condition trigger. Okay, let's turn back in now. There we go, entering flare trigger, and there's the flare off to our 11 o'clock there. So as we progress towards this FARP, we should be entering that FARP 1 trigger which we set up, and we should see a continuous stream of red flares leaving the target. Well, there's the FARP off to our left, and there. We must have entered the continuous action trigger because there are continuous flares coming off there. Let's move in for our landing, because remember, for us to be able to drop these troops off we have to be moving at less than 2 knots. Just scrub a bit of speed off here. And just pop the Huey down here, a little gently. There we go. And there, the troops deployed right in front of us.